I like to think a lot about the video games I play. I like to think about how the levels are laid out, how the story is interwoven within the gameplay, how certain design decisions wordlessly tell the history of the world. But in most games, the driving force is usually tactile. There's a definitive reason why you play. Get to the end of the level, get the highest score, level up your character to get to the end boss. Even more story-centric games have the ultimate goal of finish the story. Mobius Games managed to break this pattern with Outer Wilds. The game is not about getting higher scores or even beating the game. Outer Wilds is about exploration and knowledge. You play as the newest recruit to Outer Wilds Ventures, the Harthian space program to explore their solar system. The player character is unnamed, but most other characters refer to them as Hatchling. The game opens with you waking up on the day of your first launch. You travel through town, talk to everyone, do one last practice mission with your spacesuit, play with a couple of kids, and retrieve the launch codes to start your journey. As Hornfels gives you the code, he asks a question. What are you going to do first? Are you going to go slow and visit the Harthian moon? Do you want to discover new secrets of the Nomai, the ancient civilization that inhabited the solar system long before the Harthians evolved? Maybe go and see the astronauts charting the other various planets. There is a whole solar system out there, and you have the pleasure to explore anywhere you want to. And here is my disclaimer. There are not enough flowery words for me to properly portray how fantastic of an experience Outer Wilds is, but the best way to play is to go in with little to no knowledge. If you have yet to play Outer Wilds, stop this video now. Go play the game. Visit your ship's computer if you ever get stuck, and don't feel bad to Google solutions when you absolutely need to, but do not look up anything beforehand. I'm being serious right now. Don't let me spoil this game for you. It'll be worth it, I promise. As you head to your ship, something strange happens. An ancient statue, a bust of the aforementioned Nomai, turns to look at you. Its eyes shine bright as the memories of your day seem to flow into it. Once it's all said and done, the statue stops glowing and just kinda sits there. Well, that was weird. Anyway, off to your adventure. And here is where the game design begins to shine. There are a handful of areas to explore, and you can go to any of them at any point. The prior conversation is designed to try and point you in some direction, but the onus is entirely on you. What seems interesting to you? Do you want to go to the super scary place? Do you want to track down the other explorers? Maybe you want to figure out what the smoking crater is over on the horizon. And your initial decision, regardless of where you go, will inevitably spark new questions. If you go to the crater, you learn why it's smoking, but another mystery is doled out immediately. If you go to the moon, you learn more about the Nomai, but are left with a strange contraption and mere pieces of an ancient conversation. Even after tracking down each of the other explorers, they never have full knowledge of their designated planet, only vague gestures and pointers on where to go next. Outer Wilds is designed to get the player asking questions. Mobius Games didn't want any other forms of incentivization. There is no high score, they never motion at a way to beat the game. They designed a solar system, filled it with fragments of knowledge, and hoped the player would ask why. And it's absolutely fantastic. And it's heartbreaking. And it is so beautifully hopeful. Regardless of what you choose to do first, one thing is always bound to happen. What was once a mild and yellow sun was now almost twice as large and a dark, dark red. Then, at the end of a somber musical track, just when it looks like the sun cannot get any bigger, it implodes. Shining a bright white for just a moment, it quickly expands outwards, consuming the entire solar system in its now blue flames. However you die, whether you flew into the sun, were consumed by its explosion, or maybe just fell off a cliff, directly afterwards you will see your memories flow back into the Nomai statue from earlier that day, and wake up at camp, once again ready to start your first day in Outer Wilds Ventures. It's one of the greatest moments in the game. The initial realization that everyone you've ever known is doomed to be incinerated, and you're the only one who knows about it. It sets up the score perfectly. You are out to explore the solar system, to discover its secrets, and figure out how it works, and you have all the time in the world. During each loop, you have roughly 22 minutes to head to a planet and discover more about the universe. Each time the world is exactly the same. Brittle Hollow begins to crumble, the sands shift on the twins, the sun expands, then explodes. The only state that changes is your knowledge. Well, that and the computer on your ship, which tracks everything you're supposed to have learned by that point. Either or, the world is exactly the same, except you know how to interact with it more each iteration. The majority of the hints are given by translating ancient Nomai text. Each world has collections spread throughout for you to find. Sometimes you'll find conversations grafted on a city wall, other times you'll find written instructions in a temple. These ancient texts do two things to cement this game as one of my absolute favorites. Since all the text is diegetic to the world, it helps make everything feel real. There are people who wrote these things. They had relationships with one another. They have their own religious beliefs, their own wants and goals. The earliest Nomai simply wanted to reconnect with other survivors of a crash. The latest don't like the experiment they're doing, but'll go along with it since it'll help them get closer to a collective goal. And sprinkled in throughout these conversations is the second thing that makes this game great. As you read through these conversations, they'll mention things happening on another planet. One speaks of finding a way to get to the core of Giant's Deep. A researcher on Brittle Hollow begins researching. Later he communicates he's found the secret. These people are gone, but their research still remains. After reading this conversation on Giant's Deep, you can head to this research facility on Brittle Hollow and find the answer to the puzzle. And like the early examples of the smoking crater on the moon, after solving this puzzle and getting to the core, that only reveals yet another puzzle to solve. And the puzzles themselves aren't all solved the same way. Even the specific one can be figured out in a few entirely different ways. You might just bump into it by accident, or you might be achievement hunting too early and find another way. Or maybe you're just the clever type and noticed it right away without even needing the Nomai hints. And the game doesn't care which way you find this out, it's just happy you're learning. For the most part, this is how the game communicates to the player. It tells us information on the planet, hints at another planet, and asks us to experiment. And for all but a couple, this works great. Over the course of the main game and the DLC, I only had to look up solutions maybe 4 or 5 times. While this will vary from player to player, I do think this is Outer Wilds' strongest point. It is just so fun and rewarding exploring these planets. On an even deeper gameplay level, controls are probably the biggest hurdle. It does feel weird to move, especially jumping takes a while to get used to, and utilizing the spacesuit's hover pack takes a bit getting the hang of, but none are as hard to master as flying the ship. Mobius games needed the ship to feel like an actual spaceship, thus it's really hard to control. Early on in anybody's playthrough, expect a lot of crashes, hard landings, and flying right past your target, if not right into it. But even then, this becomes fun with enough practice. Soon you'll be shooting between planets like a real Anakin Skywalker. Also, feel free to utilize the lock-on and autopilot options, both of which the game could have communicated about a bit better. Speaking of DLC though, Echoes of the Eye actually throws out so much of the base game to the effect where going to a place and reading a thing to find a puzzle solution is just not there at all. Nor are you going to other planets or really even using the ship anymore. Really, it's quite magical what Mobius Games was able to do with it, and while some moments of the base game could be a little scary, the DLC ratchets that up by almost too much. Because to even find the DLC, you have to look at photos on a home planet. In a series of 3 plastered around a room, one holds a clue, a mysterious black spot only visible from a precise angle. After finally finding this spot for yourself, this is one of the clues I had to look up, by the way, the next step is to fly into it. The spot gets bigger and bigger, eventually blocking out the sun and any light from it. Soon everything is dark. You can't see a foot in front of you. Then lights, dozens of lights, pattern around a giant circular spacecraft. But it's all still so dark. Even after landing, it's hard to see. Your flashlight barely illuminates the strange hangar. Then, after making your way inside, after stumbling through the dark and activating a switch, you are assaulted with light. Suddenly, you're on a raft, on a circular river, floating around a halo-like planet with oh so many questions left to be discovered. And this new section of the game in many ways is so different from the base game while still managing to save the core of what makes Outer Wilds special. You're tasked with floating around this river and exploring the various towns along its path. There is text around the world, but none of it Nomai and none of it translatable. Instead, the DLC tells its story and puzzles entirely through visuals. There are graphs on some walls or computers that hint at the lore. There are also photo projectors that detail portions of what these long-gone alien folk got up to, with a caveat that many of the photos in the roll have mysteriously been burned. And much like with the Nomai text, these photos manage to both tell an incredibly heartbreaking story while also communicating the next place to explore. It's also very scary. So much scarier than I wanted. Even the initial discovery I described earlier had me sitting on the edge of my seat. Then exploring this dilapidated and overgrown swamp is unsettling. The loud noise halfway through the first loop was shocking. And finding the mummified corpses of the alien visitors was pretty spooky. But none of it could even compare to the latter half of the DLC. With the correct item, taking a nappy nap in these mummy chambers transports you to another realm. One where it's somehow even darker, this earlier item being the only consistent light source. And these sections are both so cool and I absolutely hated them. I was so tense every time I traveled to a new area, slowly crawling, exploring these slightly too big wooden houses, not sure what would be around the next corner. Absolutely terrifying. The sound design makes it worse. The creaking floorboards above you, the sound of a remote flickering through images on the other side of a door. Too scary for me. And I say that I hate this part, but that's just because I'm a wimp who doesn't play scary games. No, the part I actually truly dislike is when you meet the ghosts. The mummies on the outside still live in this world and you have to navigate these spaces once more, but this time, everything is even darker and there are spooky aliens who will wake you up if they catch you. It then becomes a game of trial and error, navigating these sequences, memorizing the placement of each alien, memorizing each twist and turn of the levels, being woken up over and over and over and over. By the end, the fear was overshadowed by annoyance, that I had to do this segment again, and again, and again. Even then though, I can forgive this slight because at the end of these sequences, you learn more about the story, and the story is what puts Outer Wilds above everyone else. And here's another spoiler warning if you haven't heeded the previous one. This time I'm really going to be discussing the game's story, for both the main ending and the DLCs. Over the course of the game, it massively doles out many big secrets. Moments that, when I put them together, they blasted me away. A lot are set up from the beginning, like why is the sun exploding? Who were the Nomai? What's this big cloaked ship doing here? But as you continue to explore, even more questions arise. It turns out both the Nomai and the aliens from the Stranger were here because of this thing called the Eye of the Universe. This eye is prophesized to be what started, well, everything. The Nomai received its brief signal and traveled to the solar system, hoping to find what was now the center of their primary religion. The Strangers received the same signal, created a similar religion, and traveled to this system only centuries prior to the Nomai. Your species, the Harthians, evolved long after the Nomai were gone, and the player inherits their history and their dreams. Each civilization is covered by a truly tragic history. As it turns out, the Nomai came in a large ship only to crash into the very earliest stages of what would become the Dark Bramble, the spookiest place in the base game, a place filled with giant creatures that devour anything that moves. 3 escape pods eject. Only 2 made it out. Years later, they built civilizations across all the major planets and devised a plot to suss out the true location of the eye. One where they would initiate a supernova, shoot a probe in a random direction, and send their memories back in time until the location was found. It didn't work. They failed. The sun did not explode. Prepared to move on, to find another solution, a visiting asteroid cracked open, coating the solar system in a deadly substance. Nobody survived. But before the strangers found the signal, their signal was uninhibited, and their entire civilization was bought in that they must find it. They destroyed their home moon, turning a beautiful swamp into smoking factories, dry soil, and a circular spacecraft. After a years-long journey, they finally reach their destination. They reach the Eye. But then they find out the true meaning of the Eye. They realize what observing it will do, and they are terrified. They burn their temple, discard the history they wish not to remember, and create a barrier around the Eye, preventing its signal from reaching any other spacefaring civilizations. Lost and demoralized, they build themselves a cyber world, a matrix, if you will, a replication of their lost moon to live out the rest of their days. A replication to haunt even longer after. With one exception, when a single stranger woke up to release the signal ever so briefly, allowing the Nomai to become enraptured as they once were. The rest of its species imprisoned them within the simulation, forever isolated. You wake up one day and explore the solar system. The same day, over and over, eventually realizing that there is nothing you can do. The sun is exploding because it's time for the sun to explode. The stars are blinking out in the sky because they too are at the end of their life cycle. The children you played with, your teachers and mentors, your friends spread across the galaxy, this is everyone's last day. And on this last day, you decide to finish the journey set by those before you. The prisoner on the stranger led the Nomai here. The Nomai devised a way to find the Eye, and you will finally reach it. And the Eye is beautiful. By being witnessed, the Eye begins its cycle anew. It shows the end of the previous universe, all the stars vanish, only you remain. After one last talk with the friends you met along the way, after one last beautiful orchestration where everyone plays their instruments in tandem, it's time to say goodbye. A new universe is created, filled with new life and new civilizations. Your story has ended, but because of your work and the work of those who came before you, life will continue.